Welcome to the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Bello, and today I've got Yedda Stancil on the show. Yedda, welcome.
Hey, Chris, how are you? Good, so good to be here.
It's so great to have you here. I can't wait to talk about mindfulness and autonomy and how to get the head trash out of ourselves. The mind talk that talks us out of taking, risks and things like that in our businesses and in our lives. But before we do that, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself real quick for the audience?
Yeah, so I love that question when people are like, why don't you introduce yourself? And then I come up with like 6 different stories I always fantasize about saying to people at cocktail parties just to see what kind of response I'd get. But I'm not going to do that to you guys today. I'm a serial entrepreneur. So when you reached out and asked, did I want to come talk on the show? Absolutely. I have been an entrepreneur my entire life. And so I'm going to give you guys the real fun bio. I've been doing this since I could speak. When I was a kid and I wanted to play, or neighbors would come over and say, hey, do you want to play restaurant? I literally would put a whole business model together and create an entire restaurant experience, menus, price points, give people jobs, to the point that my siblings and my friends in the neighborhood were like, you can't play with Yedda because it's always a job. So she puts you to work. So I've been doing entrepreneurship unbeknownst to me my whole life. And so that's the fun side of me. I've always loved and naturally had an ability to turn a vision into an idea or a product or just manifest it somehow in the world. So that's kind of the natural part of being an entrepreneur. My formal business background and training, I do have an undergrad degree and a master's in business administration. And, my ego could come out and tell you about all my 10 different coaching certifications. And I know a shitload of information. Right. I've also had a ton of failure. And so I think we got to I just think we got to be real about our bios. Like if people are like, oh, you're so amazing. I'm like, that's the highlight reel. I could tell you a lot of other stuff. So I want to keep it real. I have some natural abilities. I've got a lot of formal training, had some great successes, had some major failures. I'm your typical entrepreneur, neurodivergent brain that goes in 10 directions all at once, and just love being free. And that's really what I think, if I could put anything on my bio, is the autonomy and freedom of being an entrepreneur is what drives me every day.
That's powerful. And I appreciate the humility too, because a lot of us, you're right, we talk about the highlight reel. You look at most people's social media and it's all the smiling and the closing deals and landing a new client. You never see, you're starting to see it a little bit more, but you're almost like, is this manufactured vulnerability or is it a true story? Are people doing it for the likes and to tell the story, to bring people in? So I don't know. I'm always a little hesitant where I'm like, is this a real sob story or is this like an empowering, hey, this is a vulnerability in my life and business?
Yeah. And I love what you just said, a manufactured vulnerability. As entrepreneurs, I've done a lot of things in my life to close deals and to get business and to make money. And only now, right, and I'm sliding gracefully into 50. Am I in the place of that true authenticity of, yes, I don't need to manufacture anything. For me, not only that autonomy, but just being real. And I just feel like I've got that real radar. I don't know if it was growing up on the streets and being a high school dropout and kind of having some hard stuff to go through as a kid. But that ability to be real for me is, I think, really, really, really important when you're an entrepreneur. Because I don't think I could sell something just for the sake of selling it. I got to believe in it. It's got to be real. And I don't want to manufacture anything in my life except for thoughts and mindset and meaning making in my own head that could benefit others. That's the one thing I think I'd probably say I manufacture the most. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think it's a real thing right now for entrepreneurs, especially in social media.
It is. And it's crazy. Yeah. I find myself doing this. I'm sure you may sometimes catch yourself where I'm trying to type that perfect caption and I'm like looking for the perfect picture to go with it. And I'm overthinking instead of just being real and typing what comes to mind, speaking from the heart. I'm overthinking. And I think a lot of people are, where they're doing like 3 or 4 edits on their captions. And then what comes out is it's very far from their actual true authentic self.
Yeah, absolutely. And though I also think you could take it too far, because I saw one of the influencers out in the social media world got like 50,000 likes sitting on a pumpkin. And I'm like, okay, so no, wait a minute. Now we're going a whole other direction. So I do think there's a fine line, especially in the entrepreneurial space, of, am I influencing? Am I educating? Am I entertaining? Empower? Like, what am I doing with my product and my message and my presence? And that for me was a real big question I had to step into as an entrepreneur. Because I believe as entrepreneurs, we are entrepreneurs because we see something's missing and we have a problem that we want to bring out, or a solution we want to bring out to that problem into the world. And that's got a real big heart space for a lot of entrepreneurs. It's what gets us up and causes us to try 1,000 times to create a filament for a light bulb. I mean, who does that? Somebody who's deeply passionate about the solution that they know the world needs. And sometimes I think you got to have a little bit of a dial to understand how to communicate that, because it can come off as meaning making or madness. And so that line in between has been something I've always been trying to kind of ride and search for, because I've been on both ends of that spectrum as an entrepreneur, for sure.
Any tips on how to ride that line? Because I mean, I think I heard something that the line between optimism and mania is very low. Like, at which point are you being overly ridiculously optimistic?
It's a fine line, because, think about it. For those of us that are entrepreneurs, we're bringing the unknown into the known. That's a massive feat of creation. I mean, think about the magic that it takes to have an idea and then bring that into physical form in our world. We act like, anybody could become an entrepreneur. And I'm not so sure I'm convinced about that. I think that there's an element, and, the advice I would have, I wrote a book about it only because I kept beating my head against the wall. For 20 plus years, I was following the gurus, reading the books, walking on hot coals, and just addicted to my own personal development, thinking I had to do something different or be somebody different in order to get the success that you got, or the Tony Robbins of the world would get. And as I started looking at these big global game changers, I started thinking, what they do doesn't work for me because I'm not them. So what if I stopped trying to just manufacture or configure my own ego to be like someone else, and I actually figure out how to invite my ego to work with me to really be me? And that was where everything started to change for me. And I say I wrote a book because I started realizing my entrepreneurial mindset said, this is missing in the game of personal development, in the game of coaching, in the game of the entrepreneurial space. What are we doing to work on our own mindset? And then the question I started asking was, how do I teach other people, first myself, but others, to cultivate their own wisdom by following their wisdom and not mine? And so this bigger kind of question started coming up, where I thought, how do I trust myself? How do I listen to that voice? How do I know which voice is guiding me to make a product or a service available that actually benefits something greater than myself? And so as I started doing this deeper dive, I really started to get all the way back in touch with what's called a sponsoring thought. And the advice I'd give is, our thoughts create our feelings, and our feelings drive our behaviors. And when you look at what a sponsoring thought is, it's really kind of a core thought deep down inside of you that creates your belief systems. And so I did a deep dive into, what are my belief systems? What thoughts do I think? I'm running around on autopilot, crazy out of my mind, trying to sell people pitches and ideas. Have I ever shut up long enough and sat down and realized, what am I thinking? What am I selling myself? So I think the number one piece of advice, I'd say the first thing is that self-inquiry, having the practice of sitting down. I call it shut up and sit, because that's how I had to talk to my ego, is giving myself the space to go within and realize that my business, my outer world, my products, my services were a direct reflection of who I was in my inner world. And that was a hard question to say. Well, what would, if somebody just walked up and looked at what I'm selling in the world, what would that say about who I am? And I really did a deep dive into that, because those are my thoughts out in the world. Those are my belief systems. And so I think the first piece of that equation is really getting to know yourself. And I have a silly kind of saying, as a woman, but I say, my whole goal was to be the love of my own life. I had to really fall in love with who I was and figure me out before I could go out there and get anybody to fall in love with my products or my services or businesses or anything else. How could I give somebody something that I didn't possess? And so that deeper dive took me into a different level of personal growth and development. Instead of saying all these things are wrong with me, and now I've got to go find the people to tell me how to fix them, I started looking at, what are all the things that are right with me? And then how can I use those in a way that combine with my passion and my purpose and my products and take something out into the world and then find the people that are looking for that. And it was a total game changer for me. And it really helped me to quiet those fear-driven voices, because I thought, now I really know who I am. And now I know where I want to be. And then I would just be there. And then a like attracts like, and those people would just start to show up. And it made the whole process a lot more fun. So long answer to your question, I'd say first and foremost is, really just sitting down with yourself and going within, but really finding the things that you could love and appreciate about yourself, because I had to learn there was more right with me than wrong. And that was actually a belief system I wanted to cultivate for everybody in the world. What if I could go out there and believe for myself and you and everyone listening and everyone in the world that as soon as I looked at another human being, my first thought was there's more right with you than wrong. And that really opened up a different way for me to think about being an entrepreneur. Wasn't just a way to make money because nobody could employ me because I was too much of a rebel. It was, I really loved the creating process, and I loved being able to operate at a level that could give myself and others permission to just dream something different and to be different. And so that would be the first thing I'd say, is just start cultivating a practice to go within, fall in love with yourself.
I love that.
I mean, that's a huge one. Yeah.
Well,
think about this. Well, how could anybody love you if you don't love you?
Right.
How could they love your product? How could they love your show? I mean, really, because people pick up on that at an energetic level. They're like, I'm not feeling that vibe. Well, probably because what you sensed was the missing piece that was already there, that person was trying to fill by getting you into their community, culture, whatever company. And so that's, I think, an energetic space too.
Yeah, 100%. I was just about to update my social media story yesterday, just funny story. And I was about to be like, man, I'm still not really sure what I want. And I kind of like real estate that I'm doing, but like I want something else. I just don't know what that is. But then I deleted it because I'm like, I don't want to put out, lack of confidence or like I wishy-washy. When I say stuff, I want to be like, this is what I'm about. I want to stake my claim and really listen, like you said, internally, and really come from that place of confidence. That's something that I've been struggling with. I'm sure many in the audience have as well, where I have these highs and I'm like, I can do anything, anything's possible. I'm doing really well in my business. But then you have that little voice, like you said, where man, business has slowed down this month. Like this quarter is not nearly as great as last quarter at this same time of year. And you start to wonder, do I still have it? Has something changed? Right. So whenever you say to shut up and sit, are you talking mostly about meditation or just really journaling or a combination of all of those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. And either the title of my book really resonates with people or they get really offended. And I'm like, hey, no problem. If you're one of those serious meditators and you're totally attached to not being attached, it's not going to work for you, for me to question your language and your meaning making. The actual title came from, it was almost 8 years ago. I kind of back to what you were just talking about, that voice in your head. I had a real big breakdown, a major breakdown. And I was actually on the West Coast with Deepak Chopra, literally arm in arm, studying with him, with a small, intimate group of people. My career was at the height. I was making mad money. I had so much success going on, married to a Greek god, amazing kid, literally had the big, huge house with the white picket fence, on the cover of magazines. And I'm like, I'm going to keep going. And as I stood there with Deepak, literally close enough to kiss him, he said, "What do you want?" And in my finite little egoic brain, I said, I want the archetype of Athena. It's the stupidest thing somebody could say. Like, I want this wisdom, right? And he goes, are you prepared for ignorance? And I thought, this is the stupidest thing this man could ever say to me. What is he talking about? He doesn't know what he's talking about. And I left that weekend and came home and everything fell apart. My 20-year marriage ended. 2 businesses failed. 1 sold. It was a total shit show. And why I say that is because I had to come to terms with that voice in my head. I thought my ego was who I was. I thought the voice in my head was my true identity. And so I actually went to a therapist, and this is all in my book. It's kind of part science and psychology, part story. But I sat down with the therapist, pulled up in my Range Rover, had my suit on, sat down and was like, I just need to know what love is. And I'm just wondering if you have a book on the shelf or a schematic you could draw for me. That'd be great. We've got 50 minutes and I've got cash. So like, can we figure this exchange out?
Right.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. And he looks at me and he says, I can't help you. I'm like, what do you mean you can't help me? He goes, but I know somebody who can. And then the woman he sent me to, her name was Gina. And she said, I sit with people. And I'm like, what the fuck is that? What do you mean you sit with people?
Like,
and she said, it was a room with just two chairs and the window open. Nothing else was in this room. And as if you and your listeners can't tell by now, I'm a communicator for a living. So I was just rolling the story of suffering off. And she looks at me half an hour in and she goes, all really interesting and totally irrelevant. Now, are you ready to sit? And I was like, what does that mean? And she goes, we're going to sit across from each other in two chairs with our eyes closed for an hour every other week until you get it. And I'm like, what do you mean until I get it? And I looked at her and I said, so you just want me to walk in here and pay you money to just shut up and sit down? And she goes, pretty much. So you can learn more if you read the book, but she's an Episcopal priest who had gone into contemplative prayer, mindfulness, meditation, but had a very unique blend of Eastern and Western philosophies. And she just looked at me and she said, silence is unconditioned consciousness. And it sounds like to me, you need to rewrite some beliefs. And the only way you can do that is if you find silence and space inside of your own head, because that voice is not who you are.
Right.
And so this idea of shutting up and sitting started in a silence practice, but it does expand out. It was a deep dive for me to go into journaling, guided imagery, silence, stillness, lots of Eastern philosophies. I've probably listed them all in my book, and I practiced a lot of them. And I don't think that I have one particular one that I would land on as the end all be all. Everyone's different. Your brain's different. Every day I wake up, my body is in a different place. But finding silence and stillness in some form as I contemplated, so whether it was journaling, sitting and looking at nature, walking with my eyes closed, opened, whatever, I started to create a little bit of space. And I started to hear silence. And then in the hearing of the silence, I started just tapping more into an intuitive knowingness that didn't speak to me in words. And it was so intoxicating because then I realized my ego wasn't the enemy. I was trying to like beat her down, give her a book, give her, redefine her, fix her, reconfigure her in some way. And what I found in this journey and in my story of shutting up and sitting was she was the one who needed my attention the most. She had been really wounded. She was the one that was terrified when the money started to run out or the love didn't show up. So when I say I had to learn how to fall in love with myself, I really had to reconnect with that wounded part of myself that had kind of been split off and was running the show to go protect everybody and everything, including me. And at that seat of silence, I found this wisdom and this amazing knowingness that I was like, that's inside of me. I don't have to go get that somewhere. And then I realized it's inside of everyone. So my entrepreneurial journey, as most entrepreneurs are, started going, well, oh my God, if this is really cool for me, I wonder if it could be really cool for others. So as I learned how to do it over those 8 years, then I started actually coaching entrepreneurs with their mindset and their meaning making to learn how to do this exact process to go within. And I realized all entrepreneurs go through what really three things, global game changers that are out there, the big unicorns, the Facebooks, the Steve Jobs. They've done a ton of research. And they said there are three things that all global game changers entrepreneurs do. And the first one was they learn to quiet their fear-driven voices. And I realized I was learning to do that by shutting up and sitting down. But I don't know about you, as an entrepreneur, a lot of us as entrepreneurs are renegades and rebels and we're rule breakers. So the idea of like sitting on a mountaintop in a monastery was probably the last place you were going to find me. And I mean, I've got biker blood in my veins. My mom was 17 when she had me. I grew up on the back of a motorcycle. And so I use the language of shutting up and sitting because anybody can really resonate with that we use silence in the United States as a form of punishment.
Yeah.
And so when people are like, I can't be silent. I'm like, yes, you can. Somebody told you somewhere to shut up and sit down and disappear and like put your nose in the corner. So at some point in your life, maybe, if it didn't, good for you. So I said, how can I rewire silence to actually help me quiet my fear-driven voices instead of feed my ego's kind of fuel and fire to, protect me? So the first one is quiet the fear-driven voices, and any contemplative practice. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as you just shut up and sit down. That's what I would say. The second was really just staying in the process of creating. Was the second global game changer characteristic, which means as entrepreneurs, that's the power of presence. You know that feeling you get, Chris, when you're like, you got an idea and you get up and you're like, man, let's start working on this. And you see your idea in your head and you're so present with the creation process.
Yeah.
That's what is the coolest part about being an entrepreneur. And so that's the second one is I started thinking, well, that's the power of presence comes from me shutting up and sitting. Because if I find silence, I create space to be right here, right now. And I'm not thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. And so that really got me excited. And I started seeing I could be more present with people and I could stay with my ideas longer. And then the third was no control over others, that global game changers just love being on purpose. And they were not attached to the outcomes. So that means Henry Ford never sat down and said, I can't wait to have a yacht off of the coast of every continent. Henry Ford had a vision and he had a why, which was, I think every man should be able to afford an automobile. And so those kind of three factors really started getting my attention as I was doing this work and I started coaching entrepreneurs. And I thought, yeah, so if we could shut up and sit down and really quiet the fear-driven voices and not get rid of the ego, because that's where the fear comes from, but give him or her a job to work with us, to be present, to create, and to not worry about the outcome. Nobody who starts a project, the idea that I'm going to become a billionaire, they rarely ever actually become the billionaire because they're so wrapped up in their ego's idea of it that they're not really connecting to the deeper purpose for who they are and how they could serve. So those are kind of my 3 points of advices on the entrepreneurial space is it works. There's a lot of global game changers out there, but the piece of the silence was really missing for me. And so when I started to cultivate that silence and I found it, it was like life-changing magic for me and my business.
Yeah, I can see that. Cause I mean, so many people, entrepreneurs are type A, let's go, go, go. You don't have any blank space on the calendar. You have 5 minutes maybe to eat a quick sandwich before your next meeting, the stereotypical thing, or even like investment banking. I think of my friends who studied finance and they went to New York and Wall Street and they're working like 100-hour work weeks and crazy stuff like that. They don't have time to meditate. They don't have time to work out. Right. So creating that space in your life. And I've been working on this too. And sometimes I'm like, am I doing this right? Like, I just feel like I just sat here and thought about all the things I have to do. Did it even work? But as you start to do it more and more, you start to open up and kind of let go of the fear and the anxiety. Those are all very difficult, right? First time I sat down for 10 minutes, I'm like, God, I thought I was looking at my timer to see if I actually said it. Cause I'm like, it has to have been 10 minutes.
Painful. Yeah, it's painful. And, but I also want to remind myself and the listeners as well. Albert Einstein's one I love. I talk about him in my book. What did Albert Einstein do when he got stumped on a problem? He would go and he would play, right? He'd play his violin.
Yeah.
And so anything that gets you into the present moment does line up the conscious and the subconscious mind. And that's where the freedom is for us as entrepreneurs. When the conscious mind is lined up, which is that ability, while I'm talking to you, I'm already thinking about what I'm cooking for dinner at 7:00 tonight. That's the power of the conscious mind. While you're talking to me, you're already remembering, what you did before you came here. Listeners could be driving cars and doing 10 other things while they're listening to this. So it's awesome that we have a conscious mind. However, when you line that conscious mind up with the unconscious mind, it taps into the superconscious. And that's the intelligence of all existence. So that's what Einstein was talking about. he would just put the problem down and get out of the energy of resistance and distraction. And he'd come back into the present moment through music. And so I think it's important for us to remember this doesn't have to be agony and arduous. I'm with you. The first time I sat down was a 20-minute meditation with Deepak that weekend I'm telling you about. It was hell. I mean, I kept opening my eyes, looking at this big jumbo screen, looking for the 20-minute countdown, and was like, oh my God. However, I think it's important for us to remember what are other things we can do to bring us into the present moment. Hobbies, right brain activities, creativity, art, having fun, being out in nature. Think about as an entrepreneur, when does some of your ahas come? They don't come when you're forcing it. They come when you let go. And then there's a little bit of space in the universe and inside of you that says, oh, Chris has a gap there. Let me drop this in.
Exactly.
So I'm with you. I love the silence, but I also love that we need to remember, I'm not asking everybody to become monks and meditators, but I am asking people, can you just shut up and sit down and just catch up with yourself and create a little bit of space?
Yeah.
And that looks like lots of things for lots of people because it changes our brainwave. It activates theta brainwave. That's some cool stuff because when you're in a theta brainwave, it's the same brainwave that they put you in hypnosis. That's so cool. Think about that for a second. You're literally being programmed by the universe when you shut up and sit in that silent space.
And so many people never take the time to even ever get there, right? So they're just constantly repeating the past and living the same day. It's like Groundhog Day, right? The same emotions, the same anxiety, the same worry.
Yeah. Yeah. And, as entrepreneurs, we value so much about the process of creation. But for me, when I had that breakdown, I started looking at where was the resistance inside of me. And actually this week, I just wrote a whole blog post and did my own episode about this. And it was that the true definition of success is removing the barriers that prevent you from being fully in the present moment. It's not money. It's not sales, because I don't know anybody on their deathbed who doesn't ask for anything other than another moment. And the moment is the most valuable resource we have. So when I'm coaching my clients, my entrepreneurial clients, I tell you is we're here to serve the moment, because the real client in all of our work is the moment. What does the moment most want and need right now? And what does it want to bring out? What does it want to express through Chris, through Yedda, through anyone listening? And I thought, how much time do I spend in the moment? Do I even have a relationship with the moment that I'm in? No, I'm trying to numb it away, shame it away, blame it away, spend it away. And so I think there's a lot there for us as entrepreneurs. And the whole idea of entrepreneurship is growing like wildfire because of COVID. People, the great exodus, everyone's leaving their jobs.
Yeah.
And now everybody wants to become an entrepreneur. And it's like I'm sitting at home with a big bowl of popcorn, just watching all this. And I'm like, you don't know what this is going to take, because it calls on the deepest fears inside of you. And it calls on the deepest hero and heroines inside of us to literally break free from the world to create something new for the world. That's big work.
It is so big. And there's so many things, like people become the entrepreneur. They don't realize they got to get good at or learn how to do sales and marketing and hiring, right? All these things that you didn't have to do when you just had to clock in and clock out of a job where someone just gave you A, B, and C tasks. Now it's a seemingly endless list of things that you can do or that you should do. And so then you even have less space, or at least you feel guilty when you take that time for yourself. I found that for myself. I'm like, I can't have stagnant time. I need to be talking to clients. I need to be doing more stuff, more podcasts like the one we're doing now. But whenever you take the time, you slow down in order to speed up. I've said that before on a show where you seem like you're taking your foot off the gas, but really you're setting the GPS, you're setting the coordinates instead of just pedal to the metal in any which direction, right?
Well, and what I love is it's such a simple, silly statement, but we're not called human doings. We're called human beings.
Right.
It's pretty obvious, but we have a social norm, especially in the Western world, that the more we do, the more we'll have and the more we'll get. Here's the challenge with that, though, as entrepreneurs, if we're constantly doing, and this is how I actually say in my first episode on my podcast, it's like I did a big old high dive. My ego just went up to the high dive and just did a swan dive off, and realized as it came off the high dive that there's no water in the pool, and my ego just splattered all over the bottom of the pool. Mm-hmm. So I was so busy doing, that's why I'm like, what is love? I never realized that love was paying total attention without judgment. Ultimately, I found the definition and I thought, that's pretty cool. Have I ever paid attention to myself or anyone else in my life with no judgment? What would it look like if I could cultivate that skill? So when that little voice comes in and she's like, Yedda, that's knuckin' futz. That's this most absurd thing you could ever think of. I'm like, no, actually, and I can talk back to that voice now because I don't believe it's the truth. And so there's this dynamic where I started to cultivate a different relationship. We all do this. None of us are crazy. That voice in our head never shuts up unless you start to give it a space to just go, hey, can we just sit together? I know you got a lot of ideas. I know you think you can do all this cool stuff, but what if we could create some space and some freedom? And so as I started to do that, that space of being allowed so much more productivity to come in because the insights and the inspiration, the intuition, the intelligence that's in and all around us all the time could work through me. And then it was this unending stream that I was just allowing to get into flow with versus trying to read more books, do more classes. There's business schools all over the world. If anyone out there is an entrepreneur is like, shit, I got to learn how to do a profit and loss statement. I got to do this. There are people out there that are trained to do that and can do it for you. Our number one goal, I believe, as an entrepreneur is to tune in, tap into, and turn on that signal that allows for something unknown to make itself known through us. All the other stuff, there are people out there that will support you. My number one superhero power, I tell people, is delegation. They're like, how do you get so much done? I'm like, I find really good people because not very many people that are really true entrepreneurs are listening. And I mean, listening to the intelligence of all existence and saying, what do you want to make known through me today? And then I find the people that say, that's cool. I'd love to make that vision come to life. Yeah. And you can't find that if you don't shut up and sit down and listen for it.
Right.
But I will say this, you can't go out in public and just sit. I did this one time with my sister. And I wasn't even talking. I'm just watching. And she goes, you look like a Muppet. What are you doing? I go, I'm just practicing being aware. She goes, oh my God, stop. But just think about that awkward space of silence in social situations or even on the show. If we were to stop for a full 60 seconds, and I've done this on one of my episodes, I had the videographer time it. It feels like an eternity, but how much space do we cultivate in anything in our life? Hardly none. Music, TV, food. I mean, it's entertainment. It's around us 24/7.
Right.
So I really do believe it's a superhero power for the entrepreneurs that really cultivate that ability to go within and listen, that you will become a game changer if you do it, for sure. Yeah. It's real simple, but it's that profound.
And one thing that I heard that I started to implement is sometimes just driving somewhere without even listening to music or anything, like true windshield time, quiet, focusing on where I'm going, but also just letting my mind like kind of wander a little bit. Because like you said, we so often put in earplugs or earbuds rather, and we're listening to podcasts and audiobooks, and we're going to make a quick story update, right? We're talking while we're walking type thing instead of truly being present. And so presence, I mean, I'm sure you've read that book, The Power of Now, The Infinite Present Moment. I think Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about that because it's true. The future will be made up of present moments. The past was made up of present moments. So really all we have is this infinite present moment. So I really love that you're harping on that, because presence is something that many of us are not comfortable with. We're like thinking about what we're doing next, what's for dinner.
Entrepreneurs. Yeah. But as entrepreneurs, I think we need to wake up and realize we kind of are naturally wired for that, or we wouldn't get the downloads or ideas. But what if you could really cultivate that skill consciously?
Yes.
And this idea of presence, which is really interesting to me, which you're just talking about. I mean, it's all we ever have, right? I mean, it's such a cliche. Yeah, all we ever have is the present moment. But if we really cultivated how to really tap into that, there really is no sense of time, that space of real freedom. And, here's what's really interesting. You learn how to trust yourself at a level that you do not allow people to question you when you cultivate that silence and stillness. And I'm going to tell you something. I don't think I've admitted this on any show so far, even on my own. I've done 85 episodes of my own show, and I couldn't even tell you how many guest interviews like this I've done. I've never listened to one episode of any podcast in my entire life, ever. Really? People were like, well, wait a minute.
You have a podcast.
How did you do your show? And I'm like, I just shut up and sat down and asked the silence, what do you want to do with the show? And then I was like, oh, okay, cool. So we'll do a little intro and okay, we'll do that. And I don't know how other people do it. I didn't want to know because I didn't want to compare myself to anybody else.
I love
and
that.
You might be sitting here listening going, yeah, I listened to one of your shows. Now that explains a lot because it wasn't very good. But I trusted myself enough to say, it doesn't matter. I feel good about being in the moment of this moment to create it. And if it's not what the masses are doing, that doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong, but I'm serving the moment. And right here in this moment, it's saying, don't worry about that. Just show up, shut up, sit down and talk. And that's what I do anytime, like in the show with you right now. I have no preconceived notions. I get in my seat and I go, all right, what's the moment want to talk about? And then then the ego doesn't feel the pressure to protect us. Mm-hmm. It gets to be along for the ride and have fun and play. And then I'm just in the moment and you're in the moment. And then that's the real magic. If we could operate at that level more consciously, think about what we could create in our world. It would be amazing.
Yeah. I just shared an example maybe a couple episodes ago where my fiance is now working a job because I was present in the moment. And I talked to some random person who was doing the hot tub and cold tub therapy at the sports place I go to. 10-minute conversation resulted in, oh, I'm in accounting. Have her, we're hiring, have her text me. And she got that job just from like, I wasn't looking for anything. It just fell into our lap. And she's like, this is my dream job. Like, this is what I really want to do. And that was a true testament to the fact of like, if you're just present, the universe will throw these things into your lap. That if I wasn't present, if I was distracted, if I didn't start a conversation, that would have never happened.
Exactly. And I think I call it magic. I think there's a magic to the moment that we're in that can guide us and lead us to the next moment and the next moment and the next moment. So these are not opportunities that are for some of the rare, rich, people on the mountaintops or out in the Silicon Valley. I believe it's available to all of us. And I believe that's why entrepreneurship is waking up inside of us. We're breaking down belief systems in our public health, our politics, in the workplace, and the whole game is changing. And let's be honest, empowerment doesn't sell because nobody really on the masses level wants to promote empowerment, because what happens if everyone's empowered? People start to freak out and get fearful. And so this idea of present moment awareness is, it's so simple, but it is just so important. I really couldn't harp on it enough that if we all just truly practice being present, everything would be taken care of, because the future is not here yet and the past is already over. Like you're talking about with Joe Dispenza and all these thought leaders, all we ever have is this moment. And so the freedom and the autonomy and the creativity of being an entrepreneur really, and then my own breakdown led to the breakthrough of, how do I live a more conscious life?
Yeah.
How can I get that autonomy and freedom and creativity flowing through everything in my life, not just a product or a widget or a gadget? How could I show up and just really give people total attention with zero judgment and see the essence of them and me and them, and let that magic bring us to something even greater? And that to me is what I really think that freedom is really leading me to, is not being attached to anything other than the experience I'm having. And if I mess up and I don't say the right thing, or the right, post doesn't go out on the right platform or whatever, whatever,
it's going to be
I get
fine.
another moment to try over. And so that's, I think that's that power of quieting the fear-driven voice, which is, hey, it's all good. Guess what? Right now, we got another moment to try again. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, my son, who's 24, we've always played this game in our house because he grew up watching and learning all of this. And he's seen me literally, I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. And I really became an entrepreneur because I wanted to be a mom. And when he came in as a kid, he would say to me, I'm so worried about whatever. And I'd say, well, how is it right now? And he'd kind of look around the room. He's like, everything right here is fine. And I'm like, okay, so stay here. And then he would start the story again. And I'm like, but how is it right now? And then he'd look around the room again, and he's like 10. He's like, Mom, everything here is fine. I'm like, so stay here. Yeah. And so just practicing the belief system of, where am I? Am I even here? Because right here as an entrepreneur, I have everything I need. And if I don't, on the outer world, being in the belief that I do will bring the people and connect the dots, like you just said, with your girlfriend and all these other pieces, because all of existence is loving and cheering and supporting all of us.
It's so
You just got to
powerful.
tap into it.
I love that. So just
Yeah.
being present. I mean, I think I've seen even some people have like a tattoo on their wrist or something that says surrender, like to remind them, surrender to the present moment. Don't worry about things you can't control. Cause we create these stories in our heads of the what if scenarios, right? It's like an infinite what if this happens? What if that happens? What if this other thing doesn't happen? But if you're just here in the present moment, like the exercise you did with your son, how is everything? It's pretty good. Like stay here.
Yeah.
Don't
Right
let your
here.
mind wander, because that's where
Yeah.
people get fearful and anxious and they don't take any action because they're not able to stay in this present moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we're all familiar with the term attention economy. Social media wants our attention and
Yep,
they're pulling
everything
it in
does.
50 million directions. So this attention economy can also work for us as entrepreneurs, which is how can I pay attention right here, right now, so that I can tap into the solutions that are just waiting for me to just raise my hand. And this other space, when you're talking about presence, and I think about being an entrepreneur, I think about my son, I just think about the world at large. When I say I have everything I need, I realized when I was younger as an entrepreneur, I'd be like, that's total bullshit. I have $8 in the bank. I don't have everything I need.
You felt like a
But here's what
cognitive
I love
dissonance,
about
right?
this practice. Right. I'm like, that manifestation of like, just hold the checkbook and say, I believe.
Like,
It
I'm not
doesn't
feeling
work.
it.
Why isn't it working? And what I realized was this idea of shutting up and sitting down and going with him. When I say I have everything I need and you do and everybody else does, what I realized was this practice of mindfulness taps into reminding me to build a belief system that I have enoughness in me as a human being. That's not money. That's not houses and cars. But if I can cultivate the belief system of I am enough and I have enough inside of me to protect myself, to learn, to avoid or approach what I need, to create connection with others, and to self-regulate. And that's an acronym. If you guys are listening, it's called PLACES. I have 5 places inside of me. The P is for protection. The L is for learning. The A is I can approach or avoid as needed. C is connection. And then S is self-regulation. That's a great acronym that I learned in my research for my book. That's what the brain gives everybody. Our brain is biologically wired for those 5 places inside of us. And as an entrepreneur, when I worked with my own work, but then now with clients, when they start giving me all these problems, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. There are 5 places inside of you. Shut up and sit down and cultivate and ask, which one of those do you need to bring out to start to begin to create this solution or this product or relationship or idea or whatever? Because we've just bought into a belief system I don't have, or I'm not enough of. And the truth is that's not true. We have enoughness inside of us. So my entrepreneurial journey and my passion is to teach people that you do have enough inside of you. You do have everything you need. And if you could cultivate those skills on the inside, your outer world is just a direct reflection of your inner world. And as I started, for entrepreneurs, that's how our business is. I could walk in today and look at your business and I could learn everything I need to know about Chris, because your businesses are a reflection of who you are and what you believe. That's all culture is a combination and a collection of similar belief systems. And so I think as entrepreneurs, if we could take ownership of that and really consciously create, man, there would be so many global game changers going around the globe. It would just be freaky.
100%. So for the person listening today who never has created the space, would you have a recommendation of something they can start today, like a quick little practice, nothing overwhelming, like 3-hour meditation? What would you recommend if someone wants to get started on being present? Is it just setting a timer for 10 minutes and meditating? Or I'd love to hear your thoughts on like how someone who's never done anything can start.
And here's what I want to say. I don't think it requires anything other than what I said, to just shut up and sit down. It doesn't require a timer. It doesn't require a cushion. I mean, if you're in your car right now, obviously don't do it while you're driving. But wherever you are, what if you just shut up and you sat down and you just looked around the room or out at the street or at the trees? Or what if you just stopped and just started noticing what's going on? And then if you're comfortable, close your eyes and try it. Did you know that 80% of the information we take in comes through our eyes? And the brain is working so hard at sorting and sifting and shifting and analyzing all this information that it has zero time for self-regulation. But did you know the minute you close your eyes, the brain automatically flips into self-regulation and puts its energy and attention onto your heart, your lungs, your body. And so it's that simple. You can start with your eyes open. At least you've shut up and sat down and been like, where am I? What day is it? What's going on around me? It might be that's where you start. Maybe you're willing to get a little bit riskier and say, let me close my eyes. It might scare the shit out of you, some of the darkness that comes, and literally and figuratively. But here's what's really cool about it. You can do it. And it might be 10 seconds. It might turn into 10 minutes. I did a 7-day silent retreat once. I do not recommend it for anybody. It's a whole nother episode that we can talk about later. Yeah. It was like I went into the upside down world in Stranger Things, like halfway through the week. And I was like, I gotta get out of here. No cell phone, no wireless,
no
reception,
talking,
no internet in the middle of the woods in Colorado, no eye contact, no talking. Even the facilitators said, unless you have an emergency, you can only write on a piece of paper and tack it on the wall. You can't even come up and talk to us.
Wow.
And I remember leaving there thinking this was fucking awful. It was like I was in prison, literally, and also in my mind. And I thought, I got on a plane. This is no joke. I got on a plane. The lady at the airport was like, would you like to upgrade to first class? I was like, yes, I would. I absolutely would. I sat in the wrong seat in first class. The woman that had my seat was like, honey, she could tell something was wrong. She's like, it's okay. I'll take your seat. No lie. The woman next to me was an older lady. And she goes, where are you coming from? You look a little disoriented, because I hadn't spoken or made eye contact with a human being in a week.
Yeah.
I told her where I was coming from. And she goes, well, it's your lucky day. I actually work for the federal government, and my job is to help people get them out of cults and bring them back into society. And I'm like, no shit.
That's so funny.
And so I'm sitting there looking at this lady, and she goes, you're in dopamine deprivation. It's a serious thing. And this is how people get their heads shaved and start selling bracelets in Times Square.
Oh no.
And I'm like, what do I do? And she goes, you make eye contact with me. And she ordered Prosecco. She goes, you drink a little alcohol, and we talk the rest of the flight. And so it really woke me up to going, you could go really too far, too fast. Just because it's good doesn't mean you need to do a lot of it. So I share that story with a little bit of humor, but a lot of humility to say, you don't need to do that. You just need to just literally shut up and look around and be like, what's going on in my life? What's going on in my head? What's happening in this moment? And if you can just start with that, if you decide you want to go on a 7-day silent retreat, by all means, go for it. Write me and tell me I was wrong, please, because I would love to hear a positive story from someone who enjoyed it. But I say that, but I want to be really serious. Just start wherever you are. I think the ego gets tied into, well, I'm a meditator, Chris, and I meditated for 15 years and I do it twice a day and I go away for 2 months a year. And I'm like, oh God,
like I can't
do
that.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
But maybe it's different from, right. So I think we have to be careful not to get the ego attached to another false sense of self is my point. So just find the space. I don't care if you live in the projects or if you live in a palace, closing your eyes and going into silence is the same damn thing for anybody.
I love that. So just start where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you know what? You've got wisdom inside of you, and so does every other human being on this planet. That wisdom knows what to do, and it will start working with you if you just listen to it.
So powerful.
That's
it's just a simple reminder that it doesn't take going on a 7-day Vipassana retreat. Like you can just start, like after this call, I am actually going to do this because I do identify as a meditator sometimes, and I try to do 2 a day. And I actually have a float tank session. If you've ever been in a sensory deprivation
tank.
Yeah,
I've done it. Yeah,
that's been forcing me to spend 90 minutes at a time. But it's as simple as just signing out of Zoom, saying goodbye and like setting some meditation music for 10 minutes and closing my eyes. That's it.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I will say though, and I think this is important, it's anything that can put you in a theta brainwave state.
Right.
Did you know you can Google theta brainwave music?
Yes.
And in your 10 minutes, you can be in that energy. So it doesn't matter what it is. It's getting your brainwave, the theta brainwave activated, which then changes the whole nervous system.
That's so
And
cool.
that's the space. So I do think that's the one science little caveat I would give is, I could already hear somebody I know going, so you're saying I could just like get off Zoom yet and light up a joint and like, I'm cool. Maybe that works for you. But I'm saying it really scientifically to really start to make a difference in our nervous system and in our being, the theta brainwave gets activated. So there's lots of ways to activate the theta brainwave. Silence, stillness, yoga, qigong, tai chi, floating. I mean, you can go down the list. And that's ultimately where you'll get led to, because your own curiosity, you'll go, hey, Chris, that felt good. Didn't we hear about that float zone place down the street? Yeah, well, man, let's go check it out.
Yeah.
Then you can start listening to that voice, because now he wants to work with you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so cool. It's like
really
a
cool stuff.
superpower.
I love it.
I could tell.
It totally is a superpower. Although I'm getting ready, I can really geek out and nerd out here with you and your audience, but I will tell you, be careful when you're out like in the quote unquote real world. Because the guy that I've been dating for several years, I literally was at the bar with him tonight. And by the way, I'm not a purist. I drink a few glasses of wine every now and then. Absolutely. I mean, if that doesn't speak to you, that's cool. But my thing is everything in moderation. Mm-hmm. And I looked at him, though we were having a glass of wine, and I go, I'm pretty sure that my amygdala has shrunk. He turned and looked at me and was like, he goes, what are you talking about? And I just wanted to like nerd out on all this like science about the brain and meditating. And he looks at me and he goes, babe, I'm in a relationship with who you are, not what you do. Can you just talk normal?
Yep.
So I do think that when we get excited about something, we want to proselytize it, right? Hand out all the pamphlets about it. Be easy about it and have fun. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, an important piece I had to learn along the way was I'm no better than anybody else. I'm having a fun time on my journey. Whatever language, whatever experience I use, it works for me. If it doesn't work for somebody else, no big deal. And so this idea of just be easy and light, because when the ego kicks in and says, Chris, you missed your meditation this afternoon, you're behind because now your brain's not going to work the way it's. Yeah, that self-judgment. And you said something a minute ago that made me think, and your listeners can't see it because, I'm sitting here on video on the other side of Zoom. I don't have a tattoo on my wrist that says surrender, but I do have a tattoo on my left wrist. And I know we're on film. You can't really see it. It's on my wrist, but it's in black ink and it's in Arabic and it says, Inshallah. And so in the Middle East and the saying of inshallah, inshallah, and I'm going to murder that for all the Persians and Arabics out there, in the will of God. So whether it's God, universe, and existence, whatever language speaks to you, when I went to the Middle East and the Eastern teachings, entrepreneurship is different there. You and I are talking in a very Western belief system, even as we're using our language today, mm-hmm. But in the East, inshallah means in the will of God. So you work with that magic, you work with dignity and divinity. It's intrinsic. If you show up to a meeting and you're late, people don't get upset because inshallah, in the will of God, I had to stop and do such and such.
Right.
And so this idea of entrepreneurship is merging the East and West is a really cool time for us as entrepreneurs, because in the East, they go with that magic, they go with that flow. But the downside in the East is they don't understand some basic business structures and the ego aspects that we do. So what if we could share our Western teachings and structures with the East, and the East could teach some of the belief systems of presence and creativity with the West? Yeah. It'd be really cool to see what could happen. And so my tattoo reminds me every single moment of every day, there's a bigger magic happening here. And am I working with it and allowing it to come through me? Or am I in resistance and the language I use is trance, asleep? Am I asleep and I'm just totally not even aware of it? And I believe when we shut up and sit down, we wake up and we start to see and hear that magic in those moments, and they connect for all of us. And that's really what I want. My entrepreneurial mission now is to run around and shake as many people as I can and say, wake up, wake up. Yeah. You can do this. Personal development doesn't have to be hard and arduous. You've got it all inside of you. Just shut up and sit down and go within. I promise you, you can sit with your suffering and actually come out on the other side. And I just see so many people trapped in their own suffering, and it makes my heart hurt. And that's really the problem that I want to solve as an entrepreneur now, is giving people that pathway to say, you don't have to suffer. You're not alone. And there are things you can do that are inside of you and all around you that want to help you and work with you, not against you. And I believe that's what's going to create a more kind and loving and really peaceful, diverse, and inclusive world.
I love that. So many things that we talked about today. I took a whole page and a half of notes and I was like trying to write everything down, places and everything, but I'm going to listen to this again. So don't worry. Well, Yedda, this has been an amazing hour.
Good. I probably won't.
I know you said you don't really listen to it because you're coming from the present moment all the time. I love it.
Well, I don't want to go back and beat myself up and go, gosh, I shouldn't have said that. Or that was really, not smart, Yedda, or, my judgment. So I don't know, maybe I'll get to the habit where I will. I'm teasing, but I just love being able to show up and be here and encourage your listeners. All the fun and all the excitement and the entertainment that we're experiencing together, you and I, is available to them and to everyone. And that is the present moment gift. It's the joy is found in the moment. That's it.
Absolutely. Well, where can people go to listen to more of what you have to share and to check out your website? Feel free to share any resources.
Yeah, thank you so much. So my website is pretty simple. It's just yeddastancil.com. You can Google that, no big deal. I do have a really cool platform I just launched where I took my book and put it into kind of an online free community platform and some online courses. And that one's actually, it's a website called suascommunity.com. So shutupandSitCommunity.com. I have an ebook, suasebook.com. And my hard copy books are sold on my website because, as most entrepreneurs, I wanted to be the self-published route. I needed to keep freedom of my work. I'm so glad I did, because so many publishers and so many people I know who've written books, they don't own their content. They're not free to create. So I have a book, an ebook, workbook, online community platform. And, the podcast is out there. Google that, Shut Up and Sit. My message is I just want people, like I said, wake up. I don't care if you don't do any of the tools I mentioned, if you do them all. If something here speaks to you and you want liberation and freedom, in my coaching, I call it an inner MBA. And it's really kind of this mindful mastery of behavior and aspirations, then the work that I offer, if it speaks to you, that's what you'll get out of it. If not, hey, no big deal. Maybe you get some entertainment out of today. But you can check out those websites and I think you can find as much as you need. And if not, you know what, just shut up and sit down and ask the moment and you'll find where you need to go next. It might be me, it might be Chris, it might be somebody else. Those moments will lead you. And I trust your wisdom to take you where you need to be.
I love it. Thank you so much, Yedda. This has been an amazing conversation. And I'll be sure to put all those links in the show notes for those listening. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being a listener to the show and for checking out my message. If you've been here for a while, I'm especially grateful for you. But if you're new here, thank you once again for being a listener. Just wanted to let you know, I help people buy, sell, or rent real estate across the nation in the US. I probably could even help you across the world, but it just gets a little more difficult with time zones and setting up times to chat. If you have any questions at all, shoot me a DM on Instagram. My handle is chrisbello_, or you can also go to my website, chrisbello.com/real estate. Again, that is chrisbello.com/real estate. Happy to help any way that I can. And thank you once again for being a listener.